Hi, I'm Emily, founder of Finding Flow Parenting. I'm a conscious parenting coach. I help parents who are feeling stuck in their parenting to find more ease and flow in family life. And I am here today with Lowe Myers, who is my friend and neighbour. And she is also an award-winning playwright, actor, producer, entrepreneur and owner of two businesses and climate activist. And today we're going to be talking about the challenges of being a parent who is acutely attuned to the climate crisis and how to feel empowered in that role as mother and person of the world who is aware of the climate crisis and attuned to it. And Lily has also written a play called A Mother's Voice, which is all about this. So can you tell us a little bit about A Mother's Voice? What's it about and how did you come to write it?
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, because I deeply respect what you do, Emily, and I'm so happy to have you as a friend and just across the road. So this is so nice to be talking on Zoom. Bit odd, seeing as you're just there, but yeah, let's do this. So A Mother's Voice is, as you say, it's a play that kind of grapples with motherhood in the face of the climate crisis, and it's about two mothers, and they're both facing, really difficult obstacles in their futures, very different to each other. But the thing that they do share is that the fear and the unknown around their child's future. And so the play weaves in and out of their reflections, their fears, their doubts, and kind of ultimately the journey that they both go on to find their own unique way to be able to take action, and have hope in the face of the future of their little ones. And it's quite interesting because we wrote the play. It was originally going to be a theatre play, but the pandemic struck. Obviously theatre. And so then I started to work to adapt it to be an audio piece. And looking back now, I'm so grateful actually that I had time to do that, because it coincided with a point of my life where I was really starting to understand my journey in terms of motherhood and facing the climate crisis, and developing my hope really, and how to do that without being in denial, how to do that from a really deep place, and the struggle of doing that. And so that work actually then went into the final piece, the audio piece. So I look back at the piece now and I think, what were we going to be performing? Because the most important part to me actually came in the kind of second part of the process when we adapted it.
And I love what you did with it afterwards. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, because you ran some circles where you had like groups of mothers listening to it together and then talking about what was that about and why did that come about?
Yeah, we ran some sessions where I live in Malvern Forest, and some sessions in Hackney where my business partner Robin lives, and she's a mother as well. And we did an online session as well for mothers to listen to the piece and then come together in dialogue around the feelings that had come up. And we had an eco-therapist who helped to facilitate that discussion. And I really felt like the piece itself, there's something about audio that means that you can listen to it in your own world. You can go for a walk, you can be listening, be playing with your child. But obviously, big feelings can come up. And so a huge part for me was about them building the community, and building connection between mothers, especially, locally, that means that then it's a starting point, starting point for dialogue, a starting point for action, because I think a huge obstacle when it comes to the climate crisis is this feeling of powerlessness, and loneliness, especially in early parenthood.
Yeah, and I think when you said that, how I listened to it was I went on a really long walk through Wanstead Park and just kind of being immersed in nature whilst listening to this powerful and really emotional piece about like mothers and their struggle with, I feel like it's such, and maybe this is kind of where we'll go on to next, but you know, I feel like I feel very grateful to have you in my life as someone who is sort of acutely attuned to the climate crisis. And that's really, you know, part of our friendship, and how we bonded as friends was because we were both really passionate about climate activism. And what do you think are some of the challenges of bringing up a child in 2023 and being acutely aware of the climate crisis? Like, what's it been like for you? And yeah.
I mean, it's painful, right?
Mm.
It's really painful, and it's incredibly vulnerable, and you know, we don't have the answers. There's no you know, tick box that if we do this we can secure this, you know, that it can make us angry. You know, it's all of those emotions. And I think you know, having said that, those emotions are all lying there whether or not we really engage with it.
Mm.
You know, I think we live now in a time that, unless you know you're facing your own crisis, you know, of poverty or war, or you know, unless you have your own crisis that really means, you know, that this cannot be in your center vision, you know, I think most of us are aware whether or not we choose to engage or not. And so we're living with those feelings underneath, and they may not be surfacing, you know, we might not be giving them space to surface, but they're kind of eating away at us underneath. And so I actually think that by engaging with them, yes, it's painful, yes, the anger's there, but you suddenly have something to work with, and it can become transformative, actually really empowering, you know. And those feelings that otherwise are just there eating us away, you know, become fuel for our lives, you know, for the way we choose to live our lives, for the people that we bring into our life, for the actions that we're taking. And I think feeling like you're doing something is actually an incredible feeling, in the face of that. And they don't need to be big things, you know. I think so. Yeah, I think it's both incredibly painful, but can also be incredibly rewarding. And you know, I'm incredibly inspired by all the things that you do. You know, I'd love to hear your take on that. How does it feel to you?
Yeah. I, it, like I've been through, and I feel like I'm not, it's there, but I feel like I'm not quite as deep in it as I was. Like I was in probably from 2018 when I had my first child, to maybe a couple of years ago. I would say I was in quite a deep grief, because I think having children, and this was going to be my next question, so it'll kind of bleed into this, is having children, it really acutely made my awareness of the climate crisis and my fear of the climate crisis front and center, because I'm sort of like, what sort of world am I bringing this sweet little baby into? And that was kind of running in the background. And I think for me, it was like grief. It was sort of this real sort of like grief for what we have lost, and grief for what we will lose, and grief for my children, and what life is going to be like for them in the future. And I think the thing that has got me from that place of grief, where I felt sort of sucked into it, is a few things. I think the first one is solidarity, finding solidarity with other people who deeply care, and also through action as well. And I find climate activism, it's kind of like my therapy for that part of me. And I think there's something quite powerful about being with other people who believe in change, and who I think it's interesting because in a way I think a lot of people quite naturally and instinctively shy away from terror, and I think the climate crisis is terror. And I think the people who are drawn towards it, like you and I, are almost, it's kind of an unusual, and I'm sure, one could psychoanalyze something about us for that. But I think that there's something within that actually to look at terror front and center and use the word empowered, and be empowered to feel like you have a part and a place to do something. I think that that's what has helped me find a place of peace where I feel like it's not detrimental to my mental health. Because at times I think it was definitely a factor that was detrimental to my mental health, particularly since becoming a parent. I mean, to be honest, before I was a parent, yeah, I was aware of the climate crisis, but like it wasn't enough for me to feel like I had like personal responsibility. And then having children, it was like, oh shit, like now I feel like I really need to act. So what was that like for you? How has motherhood changed in how you feel about, in what you've done and how you feel about the climate crisis?
I mean, I feel like similarly to you, I was always, I feel like I grew up aware. I grew up as a vegetarian, campaigning to get my dad to stop eating meat and joining Save the Whales and adopting. It's like I grew up with a consciousness. And I would love to say, I have many friends who don't have children who are so passionately fighting for the climate crisis. Like I don't think, that you only start caring if you have a child, but I definitely felt like for me, it brought the immediacy. For me, it was about seeing dates like 2050. And I wasn't relating them to my life anymore. I was relating them to, oh my God, this child isn't going to be as old as I am now. Like, when we're talking about these dates, I couldn't separate them anymore. They weren't abstract. I was absolutely relating everything to this little being that I love more than anything in the world. That you're just everything in you, hormonally, emotionally, like it's programmed to protect. And I actually think that in a way, it makes it so vulnerable to us as parents, when we do engage with the climate crisis. But I kind of also feel like you access some kind of superpower because your level of care, your level of investment is, so magnified. Sometimes I do feel like I look at the world and I think it is going to be the new parents that change this, because like, oh my God, they care so much, like we've got so much invested. And I think even becoming a mom, yes, in terms of my own child, but my kind of understanding and vulnerability around just anyone's child is magnified. Any child in any place in the world, it's like I was no longer kind of thinking of myself as a child, which maybe might have been my reference before, or, it was like, no, like, it's right there. And so, yeah, that just absolute, when you look at, those videos of like mums lifting cars that have gone on top of their child, and they find like this superhuman strength that you just, because suddenly they bend all forces with their commitment, to do anything to protect that child. And I feel like, I talk about mothers very much because that's my experience, but, parents, I feel like there's a kind of wealth in terms of like the superpower that hasn't necessarily been tapped yet. But I also, having said that, and the play really explores this, you feel that incredibly intensely, but also at the same time, you've got the reality of you probably can't leave the house. you've got this tiny little being that needs you every second.
Mm.
That's so vulnerable. It's like their future is right this second, is 5 minutes in the future, 5 minutes, it's like the world both opens up and shrinks down at the same time. And there's this, for me, when I had my son, it was this incredible fight between wanting to be on the front lines, wanting to be, throwing myself in front of diggers in the Amazon forest. It's like this desperate, how I'll just do anything, combined with, oh my God, I can't do anything. Like I can't do anything that could damage, this life in front of me, that could damage me, because I am fully responsible for this life in front of me. And that, to me, that struggle, I guess, was what I wanted to explore in the piece. And I think, in terms of what people can do, I love it when you talk about how much you love like protesting and and it's like you find that it lights you up. I know for me, sometimes I do find that, but I found it very liberating, actually, to kind of recognize that at different parts of our life and different people, we will have different things that will light us up in terms of action we take the climate crisis. And for one person, it will look very different to another person. And I think when I realized that and thought, actually, it's through my work, it's through the community that I'm building, things that I can do in my local community. It's through the talks. I'm doing a talk next week, in schools. It's actually, for me, it isn't necessarily being on a protest. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And so, I guess I would encourage, everyone to think, what lights you up? And therefore, how do you use that thing for the climate crisis?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's been like at certain different points, different things have lit me up. So for example, I was doing like these sort of local community events, and they were like really sort of climate action days. And that really lit me up. But like now the idea of doing that like fills me with like utter exhaustion. And I think this is a really important point, because you have to, in whatever action you choose to take on any issue, but on the climate crisis, because the climate crisis is not going away, it has to be sustainable. And I think this is a particular thing about being a parent in relation to the climate crisis. We have to tend to ourselves so that we can actually be useful, because I got to some points where I was parenting, I was filled with grief, I was like doing all of this like community organizing, and I was really burning out. And I think that wasn't in service of anybody, really, if I'm burning out. And I think one thing that so you and I did this Active Hope course together, and I'll put that in I'll put your play and also the Active Hope course in the blurb at the bottom, because that Active Hope course was really about that sustainability. And one of the things that I didn't say we were going to talk about, but like it's been really powerful for both of us coming from that Active Hope course, has been our sit spots. And so you want to tell people what a sit spot is, because this has been such a powerful thing for both of us, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, the Active Hope course is phenomenal. Would highly recommend it. It's free online, 7-week course, and in it it goes through the cycle that reconnects. And I think it's in the second part of the cycle, or the third part, in terms of seeing with new eyes, isn't it, where they encourage you to go out and find a place in nature that you keep visiting. And it's kind of like opening yourself up to learn, not to kind of go in with your own agenda, but actually to see the world kind of through the eyes of nature, to let that experience change you. So it got me into running, because we were doing this in like February or something, I think, and it was pretty cold, and I found a sit spot, but I could only sit there for like a minute because I was freezing. So I started to run so that I would get hot, so that then I could sit in my sit spot for 10 minutes. But then obviously as you run, you get fitter, so then you have to run further. So it got me into running, which was also great for my mental health. And I try and go 3 times a week, and I just sit there, and it's the one place and the one time where I really, you know, the voice in my head shuts off, and I feel like I enter into kind of a different time and space, you know, that reminder and how sustainable nature is within itself, and the cycles, and, you know, death. I've really learned so much about death. You know, the tree that I realized I was sitting at is a dead tree, and I'm like, oh, I need to pick another tree. And then, you know, like realizing the journey of what that was teaching me. I had a friend who had just passed away with cancer, and, you know, I learned so much by how much that tree was still feeding all the other plants around, you know, from its roots underneath. And yeah, so many things that I could have tried to learn in a book, you know, or you know, online or whatever, but actually just sitting there and being and observing what is already there right in front of us. It's like the wisdom of that filtering into my life. I absolutely love it. I really miss it. If I go away, like can't wait to get back to my spot in the woods.
I can like we've got different sit spots. Like I can access my sit spot even when I'm not there, because I've been there like as a grounding tool. Like I can picture it right now. My six trees grounding. It's like, and it's really resourcing for the nervous system. But I also think it's that piece within, like, climate anxiety, I think, needs grounding. And I think nature practice is that missing piece that allows you to feel grounded so you can act from a space of empowerment rather than just fear and anger. You can still be angry and you can still be fearful, but you can also kind of be centered, grounded, and empowered. And just on that word empowered, the last thing we were going to talk about is both of us have taken our kids and do take our kids to protest and try and involve them in stuff. And actually, something you said to me was really powerful. And you are the reason why I started taking my boys to stuff, because I was saying, like, oh, I'm not sure whether I'll take them to stuff because I don't want them to be scared and feel like the climate crisis is their responsibility. And you went into some like impassioned, I'm not sure whether you remember this, you went into some impassioned speech around when you act, you empower people, and that, like, if they go and they feel empowered, then they won't feel scared. And actually, I found that to be 100% true. Like, my boys, they are like, even at my son's parents' evening the other day, but the teacher was saying that apparently my 7-year-old like says sort of something in an impassioned speech about how, like, London air quality needs to be improved because of the emissions from cars burning fossil fuels. And he's not saying that from kind of like a fearful space, which was my concern, but he feels empowered. And I think it's this thing, which I'm going to get this phrase right, this social efficacy. Is that right? Which is, I think, Google it. I think it's your belief that you have the power to change things in your life. And I think probably that is, like, both you and I think, have very high social efficacy. I'm going to Google whether this is the right word. But I think that you, just as a person, I would say you are very high in this word that I hope is the right thing. Let me
see. Whatever the word is.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we are, but I don't find it easy. I think sometimes, you know, I think sometimes we, you know, we can all feel like we are completely powerless. Well, I mean, I definitely can. I definitely can feel that. And, you know, I'm a Buddhist. You know, I go to my sit spot. I'm a Buddhist and I chant at home. You know, there are a lot of things that I have in place to help me connect with this feeling of power within my life, you know, to help me either feel connected to nature, which makes me feel bigger than myself, you know, or with my Buddhist practice in terms of, you know, connecting to my potential, you know, connecting to, you know, all people, connecting to all life. You know, there's something about drawing forth something that seems bigger than like the skin that's surrounding, you know, like this small me in like the lesser form, you know. And so I think for me, that's a constant journey. That's a constant journey. And when I think about what am I giving to my child, you know, I think in some ways he's already a bit traumatized, if I'm honest. You know, like he's witnessed me get very upset about trees that have been chopped down, like in the next door neighbor's garden, things like that, that, you know, he was there and I can't hide from him if I am, you know, really upset about something. And so, you know, we processed that and we've talked about how we're going to plant trees, you know, and work out how to do that. And, you know, so I guess what I'm trying to kind of teach him is like, yes, the world is broken in many ways. Like, I'm not going to pretend it's not broken. But do I believe that we can actually make it better than it was? Like, do I believe that we, you know, the alternative is, well, not seeing the world as broken and then just carrying on with the status quo. The world is really broken in so many ways, you know, and the climate crisis is kind of like the effect of all the brokenness. You know, it's the greed in the world, it's that, you know, it's like so the injustice in the world, you know, there's so many things that basically have led to the climate crisis that would be broken even if the climate crisis wasn't a problem. And I feel like the climate crisis is giving us like such an urgent kind of mirror, you know, to humanity and the, you know, the kind of the evils that are there within life. But do I believe that humanity has the ability and has, you know, so many people who are passionate about changing this? And so that's the kind of story that I share with my child, is like, so much is broken, but there are so many people who care, you know, and so much that we can do, you know, and it's that kind of side that I don't necessarily shy away from the broken stuff. I also don't shine a massive light on it. I think he comes across it naturally. We watch David Attenborough and he sees, you know, things like it's there. I don't, you know, I'm not making him see these things, like it's just there. But how do I equip him with the kind of, I guess, like the narrative of we are at an exciting point of history. You know, we might witness this incredible change in the direction of not just an environmentally sustainable world, but, you know, just a much better, more beautiful world for humanity. So that's, yeah, I feel like that's what I try and go in at, but I don't always feel that. So then that's my journey as a parent, right? You know, it's.
I think interesting what you said about feel like you're already traumatizing him, because I feel like the climate crisis is the great trauma of, and will be the great trauma. But the thing is, trauma born in solidarity with others and in a feeling of belonging and acceptance and social efficacy, which is the right word, in like empowerment and belief that you can make a change, is not as troubling as when we feel like when we experience traumatic events in isolation. And so I think that might be a nice point to end on, is that I really think and I'll ask you this question in a second, but if you were to say one thing to any parents out there that are feeling very climate anxious, what would you say? And I'll give you a second to think, because my answer is solidarity, because I feel like when we find solidarity in whatever way that comes, I think that for me, my social efficacy, my ability to believe in change, is really only dependent on how well resourced I feel. And I am resourced by other people in that regard. I don't feel like I can do anything or feel empowered when I'm just feeling like I'm all alone. I have to have other people who feel similar to me. So finding my other people has been really important to me. What would you say in answer to that question?
mean, I would definitely agree with that. And I think what I would add to it is find what lights you up.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a passion for photography, if you love tea, cups of tea or knitting, do you know what I mean? Like, what is it that lights you up? And is there a way you can use that in terms of the climate crisis?
Yeah. I love that. So if people want to listen to your play, what can they do? It's still online?
It's still on, like, well, yeah, you can find it on anything, Spotify, Apple, all the YouTube. And I'll make sure that I share the right things with you to be able to do that. I think if you put in Hat Sam Productions, A Mother's Voice, it should come up.
Great. Okay. Anything else you want to say? Anything you want to plug or no?
No, I mean, I would say that Karen Warrund wrote the Light Makers Manifesto, which is really about this, lighting you up, and that's a beautiful read. And the Active Hope course, you know, I'd recommend it to anyone to do online. And what we did, you know, was we did it online, we watched the materials, and then we would meet once a week, just 3 of us, to be able to talk through the exercises. And I just think that that's an incredible way to do the course, have people that you're going on that journey with is so important.
Yeah.
And it's so accessible to do. So starting with that and having a little group is a great start.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having this chat. I think people are going to find it really useful. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Ew.